welcome to the CDA Institute's Expert Series. In this edition, Brookings Institute Senior Fellow Stephen Pifer unpacks the geopolitical and domestic political considerations behind Russia's military buildup on the Ukraine border. He also predicts what strategic considerations Putin might seek to prioritize. Pifer takes the position that Donbass cannot be resolved unless a discussion on broader European security issues takes place. Here is an excerpt from our discussion.
I think what's driving Putin here towards Ukraine is, again, and we're trying to read his mind, which is not easy, but it's a mixture of geopolitical considerations, but also domestic political considerations. So geopolitically, there is this Russian concern, which has been expressed very clearly by Mr. Putin and others in the Kremlin, that Ukraine is getting too close to NATO. Well, Ukraine is getting too close to NATO because Russia has conducted a low-intensity war against Ukraine for the last 8 years, and many Ukrainians have come to see NATO membership as really their only reliable security guarantee. This, to my mind, has been a strategic failure on the part of Russian policy. But you've got that geopolitical consideration, but there's also, I think, a domestic political consideration, which is that for Mr. Putin, in his first 2 terms as president from 2000 to 2008, regime legitimacy was based on economics. And he was lucky. I mean, the price of oil went up and the Russian economy was growing 5 to 7% a year in those first 2 terms. And so I recall conversations with Russians in Moscow, this was when I was still in the government, where they would say, Mr. Putin has this informal social agreement with us. We're not going to have a political voice, but we're going to see our living standards rise and the economy is going to grow. And so that happened. When he came back to the presidency in 2012, the economic picture was much more grim. I think Russian economy has grown at an average of about 1% per year over the last 10 years. And he didn't talk about economics, but he seemed to base regime legitimacy on Russian nationalism and Russia as a great power and Russia reclaiming its place in the world. And part of that narrative required an adversary, and he chose to make the United States and NATO that adversary. Now, here's going to be, I think, an interesting clash is, to some extent, this robust policy approach is, I think, something that he calculates plays well with his constituency, and that may be true. But what happens, if that constituency, again, sees that the price of that policy is dead Russian soldiers? And I think that's going to alter that calculation. The West has done a good job, to my mind, of laying out the costs. I think there would be one more step that would be valuable is the United States and the European Union. And again, I think Canada's probably been brought in on the side as well as the Brits on this conversation. But could those countries agree on, here are the list of sanctions that kick in? And then privately communicate that to the Russians. Let the Russians know ahead of time that there will be a price and how heavy that price. Now, of course, that only has an impact if, in fact, the sum total of those sanctions have a real, economic impact on Russia. But at the same point, I think there are these 2 dialogues. There's a chance to reinvigorate the Normandy process. And then there's this other question of this broader dialogue on European security questions. My own view is you probably can't resolve Donbass until you have that conversation on broader European security issues. And the Russians have raised some questions there, but I think NATO and the United States and Ukraine also have some issues. So you've got to put all of those issues on the table. That'll be a long, arduous process, but that dialogue may find some ways to defuse some of the issues that we now see having crystallized in the current crisis. But the most important thing is, do the Russians take the steps to de-escalate? Now, it's hard to see diplomacy going very far if the Russians are still maintaining this threat of military invasion hanging over Ukraine.